I see the number has slowly stopped, so we'll begin. What we're going to do today is work together to improve the airborne data and services at EOSDIS for NASA. If you can change the slide there, Sarah, we'll talk about what we are going to cover today. I'd like to thank my co-session leads, Michelle Thornton and Sarah Lubkin. I'm going to begin with an overview of the workshop that occurred in March of 2022. It sounds like a long time ago now, but there's been activity throughout the past months since the workshop, and we're bringing you another installment of what we're up to. Then we're going to go through some of the recommendations that the organizing committee is deriving from all the feedback we obtained, and then work through an interactive activity that's going to address one of those recommendations, and we'll do that together in breakout rooms. Next, please. So in March of 2022, the Airborne and Field Data Workshop occurred. It was a 2-day workshop designed by a committee of representatives from DACS, as well as Sarah and myself Sarah representing EOSDIS, and I represent the Airborne Data Management Group for NASA. And we pulled together to design this 2-day workshop that included the need to address all of the user and data producer opinions about how we can do better at improving the acquisition and use of NASA's airborne and field data. The workshop goals are listed here, including the ways to improve the discovery, access, and reuse of this data, to ensure the community needs are better met, to realize the full value of airborne and field data. A lot of times this data is collected and set aside, and that's a great investment in NASA effort, and we'd really like to see that data have a greater longevity in the system, and to enable open source science more. And what does that mean really for airborne and field data communities? The workshop had 2 days. We had day 1 was just for data users and data producers to listen to those data users and get feedback on what they feel is the biggest pain points for them in working with airborne and field data from NASA. And then on the second day, we gathered with the data producers, a smaller group that listened to those data users, and we discussed first what they heard, and then went on to talk about the things they need to better do their job in producing data from their science research. The workshop attendees, we had over 270 people registered for the workshop. And in that process, we asked them questions. So we have some feedback from every registered user. Then we also had about 50 to 100 at any given time during the 2-day workshop, with the maximum attendance, of course, on day 1, when there was both workshop attendees that were data users as well as data producers. As you can see in the figure on the top right, about 80% of those attending were data users, data producers, or those who consider themselves both. They use data and they produce data. So we really hit our target audience of getting the right community and listening to what they had to say. On the bottom, you can see how those broke out. We have about 75% that are student or postdoc, early career and mid-career. So we were reaching the younger community, which is the ones we really wanted to hear from. Sarah, if you can give me the next slide, please. All of the feedback we obtained from that workshop included the registration answers, the workshop chat and questions that occurred during the 2 days, the Slido polls we used during some of the sessions, Jamboard contents, because Jamboards were used to gather feedback, and discussion notes from when we had breakout rooms, plus some more types of feedback that came through. All of that feedback was categorized into these 12 categories. And as you might imagine, the largest 3 categories were the search and discovery need for improvements, the data and information access improvements that were needed, and greater consistency across all of the data centers at NASA, or the DACs. We'll use that term a lot here in this session. The DACs that have different ways, and they serve different communities. They have different ways of dealing with the data. And so those particular needs are about having that be more consistent across the different data centers. Next slide, please, Sarah. From all that feedback, which we gathered like from those different ways, which I mentioned, we created 60 user stories that represented the type of feedback we obtained. As you can imagine, there was a lot of repetitive information. So we had these 60 user stories that we developed to represent that. And here's just 5 as an example. We wrote each so that it explained the type of user and what the type of user needs. So as a power user, I want to easily download bulk data rather than get one file at a time. That is a need, and that's the example of the types of 60 stories, user stories we had. Next slide, please. We brought these 60 user stories to the summer ESIP session that we held last July in Pittsburgh. These user stories were assessed by the attendees at that session, and some of you probably were there, for priority. We categorized them as must-have, need, want, or not important. From that, we took the must-have bucket that you see on the right there, and it had quite a few slips of user stories in it. And we took the highest priority needs and then assessed them for effort and cost. And what you see on the bottom right photos is the working groups standing around and discussing what would be the effort and cost for each of those items that they had to work with. We also had a group online working with their must-have bucket and the types of what would they think is the effort and cost of each of those must-haves. That was really helpful to get us going. Then next slide, please, Sarah. We continued with all 60 stories, and we identified the effort, the cost, and then started looking at what's the status of every user story. Does part of it exist? Is it in progress? Does it not exist at all? And then we started looking for solutions, how to improve the situation, how to address those needs. And so we started collecting all this into this particular spreadsheet that we used to then derive our recommendations over a series of monthly meetings. Next, please. From that, click again, Sarah. Sorry, this one has a thing. From that, we have program changes. These were high return, low cost, culture change required, changes that we think were good recommendations to make some differences. One is to develop uniform and consistent practices across the DACs for documentation and user guide. This addresses the consistency need that the users are asking for. Next, please. We have to plan another workshop in 2 years. Any changes we make in these next 2 years, we want to get feedback from the community, both communities, the data users and the data producers, to know if what we've been doing is actually helping. And the next. We want to provide a means to share science team develop code. We heard this a lot, that they're being asked to share their code through open science, but there's no consistent means for doing so right now, and communicating that to all the data producers is very important. Next, please, Sarah. We also had a category for new tools and services. These recommendations address the greatest number of tools and service requests that we heard. One is to ensure airborne and field data can be found via Earth data search. A lot of users of data in the airborne and field realm find it very difficult to locate their data in Earth data search, which is the search tool at NASA, Earth Sciences. So that's one of the greatest areas we can make improvements on. ADMG has been working on that by building Casey. It's a different tool that has about 50% more metadata that improves the way one searches for airborne and field data. And Casey is beginning to get more use as we get the news out about that. It is in beta form right now, but it will be released later this year in final form. Next is to provide ability to search for multiple variables in various ways, whether that's in situ air samples or looking at a total column or specific altitudes, or to whether it's remote sensing of the surface with locations, bands, altitude, or the ocean surface or ocean subsurface. These types of more unique searches are really needed for this community. Go ahead, Sarah, please. Also, we had to utilize campaign catalogs or flight catalogs. This is something that some of the DACs are doing, and the users really like it. So it's a matter of gathering the contextual information for these campaigns and organizing that information better at the DACs. Also, to provide the ability to subset data based on location, date, altitude, instrument, platform. As you can see, they want to make use of the metadata that's built inherently within this heterogeneous campaign data and have it make it easier to find specific subsets that occur when an event is occurring within the larger campaign. And then to expand it or improve existing tools such as the Field Campaign Explorer, for example, and then enable data subscriptions to update users when new data is available. All of these would make a vast improvement in the use of the airborne and field data that's at NASA's Earth Sciences. And the next slide, please. So next is to work on some immediate changes. These are high return, high need, and low cost efforts that we identified from all of the feedback. One is early DAC assignment. We've been making that change for the past year and a half, and it has been helping. We find that by assigning the campaigns to a DAC as the campaign is getting started is making a difference in the kind of data that's delivered and the speed with which that data can be published at the DAC. So that's an important change. Next is improved DAC campaign or instrument information, making sure that the DAC shares more than just the data and the metadata for those data products, but rather shares a lot of the campaign information, or the instrument, if it's a facility instrument, shares that detailed instrument information. Next, please. Also, more consistency in units, file formats, and variable names, terms used in communications. All of this will make a big difference in communicating the details of airborne and field data. And lastly, Airborne and Field Resource Center on Earth data. So that's what we're here to do today, is to start to think about what is needed for an Airborne and Field Resource Center. And that would be available to every user. And we can tailor it to different types of users. And so we're going to spend some time today in this workshop looking at what that would need to be and what it would need to contain. Sarah, we're going to click to that next slide. Do you want to take over then? So one of the things we want to do is think about, what is it that an Airborne and Field Resource Center is? What do you think of when you hear that? Feel free to unmute, and can they unmute themselves?
Yeah, they should be able to.
Great. So please go ahead and unmute and give us some thoughts. We're just doing a little brainstorming here.
Yeah. So maybe I'll start. I think it's a place where a new user can come and figure out, what do I do with this airborne data that's different than the stuff I usually use?
So how would this be different from Casey?
That's a really good question, Rama. Casey is a search tool for looking for information and data for airborne and field. It's not designed to be a resource center where there's other materials, other information, micro articles, etc. So what we're trying to decide is, what does an airborne resource center need to be versus Casey, which is just simply a search tool.
So one of the things you could do here would be list Casey plus various other places where you need to go to get the various pieces of information. Like what are all the campaigns that have flown? That probably you could find from Casey also, but if somebody really wants to find out what all data are held at a particular DAC on a summary basis, for example.
Oh, I like that idea, Rama. That's a very good one. Yeah, what campaigns are at what DACs? Although as we all go into the cloud, perhaps that doesn't matter as much. But it is good still for being who to contact, right?
But each DAC is responsible, even if the data are in the cloud, they are responsible for that piece of data that they're assigned to.
Anyone else have anything to contribute? What do you think of?
I'm wondering if maybe there
Plan-
will be any information about
Plans,
uncrewed systems like drones, or is that separate?
That's probably a great idea, is to add some drone information. I know that there is a need out there for more information on what metadata is needed for drones. ADMG's heard that request before. We haven't had the time to address that need yet, but that is definitely, I think, something that's very helpful.
sorry, I interrupted earlier, but I was thinking probably you need to put something about plans and schedules for upcoming, I keep saying missions, but campaigns. Yeah. And opportunities for getting funding. Probably pointers to roses, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Rama. I hadn't thought of that one either. You've got some good ideas there, Rama.
Oh, just living long helps, I guess.
It does.
Can I ask a clarifying question that might be a little silly? When you say like airborne data here, is that only from like terrestrial like flights, or does that include like spaceborne data, I guess?
It is just the flights or balloon.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the flights can be looking at the atmosphere or studying
Right,
the
right.
clouds or the land surface or the ocean surface.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And it's actually, we keep saying airborne, but we mean airborne in field. So that is also means in situ data,
Right.
things
Sure.
from
Sure.
campaigns
Yeah.
where they're collecting snow depth or something like that. It's just,
And it can include instruments on vans or trucks or cars,
Very cool. Very
ships and buoys, etc.
cool. Mm-hmm.
We give all these things a silly name called suborbital.
Oh, yeah, that would confuse me for sure. I would definitely think space. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the terms that causes confusion in the community, because suborbital is often thought of only as the airborne part, not as anything on the surface. So we try to take the long term of airborne in field. Anyone
have,
else? Go ahead.
I was wondering if there were any more catchy names in an airborne and field resource center, like, you know, AAFRC is not a good acronym, but it can still be called that.
Well, I imagine that there's people, different stakeholders, different users of this center would have different needs. So, you know, classifying that would be helpful, you know, for scientists, definitely, you know, they would like to see the schedule of the campaign and what's the upcoming solicitations and what other, you know, instruments out there is already, you know, in place, and, you know, what kind of collaborations, who they can collaborate with, and those type of knowledge base would be useful for them. And for the data producer, then what they would need is more like the standards, what kind of standards is, out there that we should be using versus, using your own, what are the metadata that, should tack on to the data products, and where should the data go? Is it which stack or what repository, and then as a user of just, also the scientists or some other users, educator even, so where am I going to get the data sets and what kind of tools are out there would be useful for me. So looking at different type of data might help categorize them and ask the questions of what do they need, and then pull those resources. And another thing would be useful is like FAQ, right? So people love FAQ pages. That's it.
That seems like a good place to go to the next slide, maybe.
Yeah, excellent transition.
Yeah. So we actually thought about that, Emily, is who would use our Airborne and Field Data Resource Center. And we came up with 5 categories of who would use it. The first was novice users. These are people who are just trying to get started. They might not be familiar with airborne data, and they might have used satellite data or they might not. This might just be the data that is available for their study area. Maybe they are studying somewhere in upstate New York and there's a lot of avarice data and they're like, oh, great, now what? Which, speaking from personal experience there, there's experienced data users. They know how to access and use the data, but they still need resources and don't want to spend all their time looking for those resources. As Emily mentioned, data producers, they want standards. They want to know what our requirements are. They want to know data formats. And then management, NASA headquarters might want information about Airborne for their reports or for administering grants to their PIs. And then finally, the DACs would also be using this to see what kind of information there is and share information with each other. And so we came up with this activity. We're going to look at 3 of our data user types, the novice user, the advanced user, and the data producer. And we're going to design a Airborne and Field Resource Center for them. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide into breakout rooms. Each room is going to have, or for each breakout group session, there is going to be a Jamboard. It's going to look like this. So this is the one for experienced users. There's a whole bunch of resources we already know we have here on the bottom, and there's some blank Post-its. So what you're going to do is, as a group, decide which of these resources is appropriate for an advanced user, and what are we missing, and put that on the Post-its. And then after 10 minutes, we'll get back together, share what report out from the breakout groups, and then we'll go to the next type of user. So let me go back to my slides. Okay, we also created a resource description page that is linked to in the Jamboard. And that has kind of a description of what these cards on the Jamboard are talking about. So we're going to divide up into 3 breakout rooms, one with Deborah, one with Michelle, and one with me. And then come back in about 10 minutes. Any questions about this?
Sarah, there's a quick question in Slack about your slide deck that you're sharing. Is that available? And if not, maybe we can make it available later.
Well, yeah, we'll make it available after the session. We just kind of ran out of time. Keeps happening to us.
And
I just wanted to let everybody know that I will be placing people in each of the breakout sessions. we thought we were going to go with 4, but we decided to go with just 3. So Rama, it looks like you're off the hook.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms now and start assigning people.
Great. And just to mention, those who are still here, we're going to the novice board first. Yep.
Wow. So I'm thinking maybe the thing to do is to have someone who is not us summarize from each group.
So I don't know how small your groups were. Mine was fairly small. So
We had 4 people, but we had Jake and Rama and Justin, and maybe Jake, you want to be our reporter?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to go now?
Let's let Deborah's group go first.
Order is good.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
I think that puts me on as reporter as the other person in Deborah's group.
it does, Mike.
Let's see. I don't know if it makes sense for.
Yeah, if you want to
all-
show the screen, go ahead.
Yeah.
That's easier.
Let's see. Actually, do we want to have one of you all share the screen? Just because I think the other groups, they won't be able to do the screen share.
Yeah, Sarah, if you can share the screen and then we can just go through the 3 pages.
Okay, let's do that, and maybe we won't try to fill out this
Right.
thing. Am I sharing my screen right now? I'm not sure.
No.
Not yet.
Okay, let me do that. Share screen. Window, that window. Okay. All right, so let me just go back up to breakout group 1.
Yeah, so we were, when we ended the breakout rooms, talking about how a lot of the difficulties for novice users comes into discoverability and figuring out what data exists and then how that data connects to other products and how it's been used in the past for their problem space, so on. So we've got here on the left side 2 different clusters, the top one being different sort of discoverability and definitional tools so that you can try and figure out what actually exists. And then below that, worked examples, tutorials, videos, things like that to show how people have actually been applying these tools to specific problems, and specifically looking at this idea of having multiple points of entry for new users so that you can come in to a lot of different places in the documentation and start moving with data. And then over to the right a little bit more of these help tools and how you can expand from, once you know that these are things that exist, how can you get help applying it to your specific situation? So that's how this one's structured.
I like how you structured this. That's a good thought for how we divide resources. All right, group 2, Michelle's group.
Do you want to advance the slide? Or, yeah. And then anybody from the group that we were in?
I can do it.
Thanks, Mary.
So Emily suggested that we just start out with writing questions that we have, and I'm a novice user, so my first question when I come to a data search tool is always like, what scales are available? And so we talked about what discoverability tools there are for both spatial and figuring out the spatial and temporal scales of the data. And then another question was what are what tools are available to analyze that data once you figure out the scales. And so we have tutorials and data use videos and other resources there. And then someone asked if there's a central repository for airborne research publications, and that seemed to be that's an open question, might be a new category. I think like what is fair is kind of a sticky note that might go there as well, because maybe that's like a growth opportunity. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else.
So we approached this by what Emily suggested was asking questions like what would a novice user ask, and then dragging cards up to see what if we were hitting that. So that's how we approached it. It was a great idea.
That's a good approach too. Thanks, Michelle and Mary. So group 3, Jake.
Yeah, so I think that we kind of collapsed along the same dimensions as the other two groups. Essentially that it'd be best for novice users to kind of see both definitions in the sense of what is this, and also examples of kind of how others how you could use this sort of data, or current examples of other users. And what they're currently doing with the data. For example, kind of knowing maybe through micro articles or through or somehow else current funding that's associated with the data that you can access here. And then cookbook examples and tutorials were a big part of our conversation. Yeah. Clickable links and a lot of info on like a main page. Not a lot of info, but you know what I mean, enough that you can kind of go down a few rabbit holes. For me is ideal.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Anybody else have anything they wanted to say about the novice user experience? So we're going to do this again with for an experienced user. So now we're thinking someone who's used airborne data, they know what they're doing, but what would help them with their work. So we're going to break out into groups again. Deborah's 1, Michelle's 2, and I'm 3 again.
I put the link to a new Jamboard in chat, and I'm sure that'll show up in the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
Are we back in the main session? Yes.
We are back.
Okay.
And I'm going to share my screen again. There we go. And we're going to report out just like we did before. Only this time we're talking about experienced users. And I'm curious to see how, I don't think we have many experienced users in this group. So I'm really curious to see what the thoughts were. So Deborah,
yeah, for our group, Rama, can you discuss how we went about this? We lost Emily. She was an experienced user for us and had a lot of good input, but she had to drop off to go to another meeting.
Yeah, I'll try. First of all, we said everything that the novice user needs, the experienced user also needs, because they may be experienced in some things and not experienced in other data sets. So that's one global comment that we made. And then we said the data management plans, not the template, but the plans themselves are an important thing for people to see, and pointed out that they need to be living documents, and links should be provided for any data set or to a centralized repository of DMPs. And you should be able to point to it. And Emily brought up something about using artificial intelligence for building some things like this. Let's see, yeah, linkage between the DMP and the repository. And we talked about tools that need to be brought that people could use. And yeah, for the data from this particular campaign was useful. I can't really read these things, so just have to. Oh yeah, cloud tools. It would be good to provide visibility to them, even though the experienced users may already know about them, but it's still useful. And if they're producing code, for example, it would be good for them to know what the open source requirements are. I guess that's about it. If I've left out something main, maybe Deborah can fill in.
No, I think you got it all, Rama. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Rama. I like that everything a novice user needs is experienced users also need. So that's, I made the post-it for that so we don't forget that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think the key here is that to remember that in a heterogeneous campaign collection of data products, if you're an expert at radar, you may not know that much about data from a sail drone, for example, and therefore you are a novice user on that other data set that you might need to compare to.
Okay, Michelle, how about your group?
Mike, you want to go or me?
We
I
had a great
nominate you.
discussion. Yeah,
All right.
me too.
All right. Well, we
Sarah, do you want to advance the Jamboard?
Oh yeah, that'd be.
There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, so we kind of talked about Mike and I coming from the kind of active PhD science kind of end user background, talking about what we really kind of like to see on the hunt for new data, and really a lot of that is consistently define things like variables, for every data set, for the data that I can use, what are the variable definitions with like a little bit of information about kind of the science use case. I know for me, cloud information, like I said, I have to reorient myself to the cloud every like 4 to 5 months as I need new data or what have you. And so reorienting myself with some in situ help would be nice. But really we kind of talked about from that, it's like kind of simple API clients, data recipes, access notebooks, cookbooks, that sort of stuff. If I can immediately kind of have access to it, goes a long way. Knowing what's in the data product and how can I immediately access it within the next 15 minutes is really what's helpful. So I don't know, guys, if I left anything out, but yeah.
I think the only thing I'd add is this idea of how do you synthesize new products with things you're already using? So we've got on there like variables, consistent and defined, inventory terms, definitions, things like that. Of an experienced user has workflows that they're trying to fit these pieces into, and figuring out how new elements play in with the rest of the puzzle is really a key challenge.
Then I'll just add, both Jake and Mike had really great insights, and the DAC perspective is we're often working really closely with science teams who are very experienced users, but there's also experienced users who are, remote sensing scientists, but who might not be plugged into that kind of world. So they want to kind of quickly come in and be able to get what they need and get on with their research. So I think a lot of what we have here is reflective of that.
Yeah, well said, Michelle. I think that encapsulates it entirely. Yeah.
Thanks, you guys.
Anything else from Michelle's group? Okay, group 3, Justin.
All right. So in light of hearing group 1 and 2, it's almost like, yeah, these are some really interesting perspectives. But here's how we thought about it in group 3. We kind of broke things up into groups of tooling. So you have Casey, Everyday to Search, and Airborne, and tool tables, and probably we can even add Harmony over there. So those were the tools that we felt like, even if you're an an expert, you probably would want to know about if you don't know about them. And then we had more of the policy type of things for experts to be aware of, such as SPD 41A and information on open source science. And then recommendations from the ADMG. And then general information that any user probably would want to know, is general information such as FAQs or the help button or anything dealing with the bulk data download help. And I saw this as a common thread on everybody's cloud information, anything cloud related. I think I think we all should agree that that's key. There's this section that I'm seeing, but I can't quite read because it's so tiny. Oh, it's about a chance to share. Okay, so so we thought about even though you may be an expert, maybe you want to share some things. Maybe you want to share data recipes instead of viewing them. Maybe you have your own data recipes. Maybe you have your own notebooks. So maybe it's time to a place to share what you have, or articles that you wrote that you want to share with the community. So, or articles that you're reading that you find interesting that you want to share. So that's what came out of our activity.
Marcel or Peter, do you want to add anything? So we had a little less time than the other groups. I got stuck in limbo between the main room and the breakout room for quite a while. So we didn't have as much time for discussion. Anybody else final points? I thought it was interesting, the different perspectives about what is an experienced user. And I think that's something that we'll have to take into account, Deborah, as we start thinking.
I agree. Yeah.
I thought the one that Justin mentioned at the very end, like chance to share data recipes and writing and reading micro articles, that was a unique thing that's a very useful thing.
Yeah, I really like what the individual groups are coming up with of things we did not think about. I think that's super helpful and really gives this exercise value for us. Our next group is the data producer group. And so we're going to do this again, thinking as data producers. I don't think we have any data producers here, but maybe we do. So we're thinking as someone who is on a campaign, maybe the data manager who is working with the DAC to help get the data into the DAC, or someone who's using Airborne data and creating a higher level product, or yeah. Anything else to say about that, Deborah?
No, I think you've got it. It's anyone who makes a data product for whatever reason, even if they're not related to the campaign. They might have a new type of product that they can create. There are past campaign data that's used to make a new data product after the fact. So there's definitely folks that do that.
All right. Somebody's enthusiastic on Breakout Group 1. So Breakout Group 1 again is Deborah. Breakout Group 2 is going to be with Michelle. And if you don't see Deborah, Michelle, or me in your breakout room, I'm probably stuck in limbo again, and I'm Breakout Group 3. So just go ahead and get started without me. It's
That's
the
right.
NASA computer, the joy of being on a NASA computer on browser Zoom. So,
yep.
All right. So we'll see everybody soon. Okay. So we just did data producers, and my group had some really good discussions. So I hope all the groups did. And we're going to start with Deborah's group with reporting out.
I can take a stab at it if we want.
Great.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I've got a specific perspective here, though. That note in the corner is mine, where we talked a lot about, obviously, as you can tell from this, we think that data producers need a lot of individual pieces of information here. And so there's a lot of information here of what are the requirements around the data product that you're producing. So how is the data being used? Who's using it? Why are they using it? Things along those lines. And so there's a lot of information that a data producer requires in order to make their thing useful. To that end, they also need to have a way to find definitions, standards, inventory terms, things like that for their product to align with. But then my personal pet peeve in this area is that in order to make it so that people actually do any of these standards and that people actually follow through with any of these nice things we'd like them to do, I think that a lot of the times there is a gap in the tooling available in order to actually produce standardized data formats and standardized outputs. And that a lot of the times people wind up doing things in an easy but not ideal way because there's a tooling gap that makes it really difficult to do things the way that we would like people to do it. And so better tooling for producing metadata files, for producing standardized metric definitions, things along those lines, and then tooling to validate the outputs to say, okay, well, looking at what you are about to upload, we notice that it's different from what would expect in these ways, I think would be a huge win for making it so that people actually cooperate with the standards and so on that we wish data products aligned with.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Mike.
Thanks, Mike. And I think I would just add that, yeah, we had a lot of conversation about really understanding what the user needs and making sure we build to that. So knowing your user community was important.
Okay, I'm gonna rush to Michelle's group since we only have 6 minutes. Michelle, or Michelle's group representative.
Valerie, do you want to share?
Oh, well, okay.
I don't want to put you on the spot. Both Rama and I have shared, so.
I thought I had unmuted. Yeah, so we added the DPTG as the data product developers guide, which has a lot of the information about how to standardize data products. Oh my God, this is tiny for me. Let me move it over to my bigger screen so I can see. We did talk about how some things like FAIR, it was difficult to know which components really applied to whom. And so we talked about breaking out, what FAIR was. As far as there's quite a few of linked items like standards, kind of led to open source science info and cloud information help. We have a little cluster in the bottom left there of tutorials and definitions and things that would be contributed to by the data producers, if not consumed by. But of course, everybody needs FAQs and help buttons. And I'm not sure that was an overarching summary. Did I miss anything?
That was awesome, Valerie. Thanks. Yeah. So the thing that came up that was interesting to me, what Valerie said was about FAIR and whose responsibility is it, right? Is it the data producer's responsibility? Is it the DAX? And then, mostly we know that that's kind of a dance that we do between DAX and producers.
Well, and also which components of FAIR apply at which stages, right?
Yeah.
And when we talked about data use videos that we put in there, we specifically talked about providing instructions on how such data use videos are produced and how the data producers can contribute to them. So we didn't quite capture that in the words, but that's what we said.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle's group. So for my group, Sandra's going to report out.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, I jumped in kind of late, so I'm going to try to make sure I do an okay job describing what we came up with. All the things that have already been mentioned are fantastic to add to, collectively. A couple of things that we thought about were, as a data provider, you want to make sure like your data products aren't being modified or manipulated in any way. So there's quality checking and assurance that as a provider, you want to make sure that you understand, how the DAC or the data center or analysis centers operate, to ensure that your products are, remain whatever. So also analytics. So that's really powerful for the provider to have, like user profiles, who's using our data, how frequently are they being used, downloaded, number of files, all the favorite flavors of metrics, number of files, bandwidth usage, what kind of research and applications are happening with our data and products. We also, that goes along with metrics. And then data provenance, tracking all of that is very useful, as well as that goes along with publications and things like that. That also goes along with citations. So that's somewhere. Yep, that's there. We talked about, we want to make sure that the providers get the, the credit that they deserve. DOIs, citations, inventory terms. I'm not sure what that means from our group, but I'll just keep moving on because maybe somebody else wants to explain that one, as well as definitions and the ADMG recommendations. That's probably some kind of like organization that has good standardizations that we want to follow, right? That's what I'm guessing. As a former DAC manager, we used to, work very closely with international organizations that, we wanted to make sure everybody's following the same recommendations. I don't know what DMP templates are. We want to keep our science open source. So any information, readmes, any kind of information that the providers can work together alongside of the DACs or the data centers to keep everything open source, and transparent and fair. Working with the DAC, I think that was one of mine. It was sort of like, getting started. How does it work? What that means in my brain is like, what is the architecture, structure? How are my data going to be viewed, discovered, and things like that. Help desk services for the providers, of course. Alerts if they're, we think we've uploaded data, but some files are missing or whatever. Things don't get through, files become corrupted for whatever reason. That goes along with FAQs and help. But
Thanks, Sandra. That was great. It was really interesting to get Sandra's perspective. She came from CDDIS, which is a very different type of data, but there's still some of the same concerns and some of them very different. So that was really interesting. I think, let me just check, we are right at time, and I just want to make sure we didn't have anything else in our.
Yeah, we had a few slides there, Sarah, just to sum up. So
yeah,
just so everyone can note, we do have a web page, and the final report that's coming out in February will be on that web page once we have it finalized. And you can reach out to Sarah, myself, or Michelle for more information or anything you want to discuss further. And we thank you all for participating today, because I think this has been really amazing.
It was amazing. Thank you, everybody, for all your input. We're really going to consider this when we start working on, we have an airborne and field data working group, and this is last year's project was the workshop. This year's project is getting this airborne resource center up, and anybody wants to join us, you just let us know and you're welcome. So
yep, great information. Thanks, everybody.
Just one quick comment.
Yes,
when we were talking about data producers, I don't think we really said what is so specific about Airborne. I think what we're talking about just applies to others too.
Yeah, and that's good actually, because we probably need those kinds of resources for all our data producers, and that's something as EOSDIS I can think about separately from the Airborne. As well.
Yeah, Data Producer Resource Center.
Yeah.
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 Great.
Well,
Good point, Rama.
also,
Thank you.
also given that Deborah is on the editing committee for the data product developers guide, things that we talked about today that are on the sticky notes, maybe we can consider them and see if any of that stuff is missing in the DPDG.
Yes, Rama, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. I'll go back and take a look before our next meeting.
Which is next week.
Yeah.
30
Gosh,
31st.
time flies. Yes.
Next Tuesday. Right.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.